Hi, everyone. My name is Kristin Snowden. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the state of California, but this is not therapy. This is just meant to be an informative webinar covering topics around the subjects of just all things related to relationships, why we struggle with relationships, how bad and dark and traumatizing some relationship dynamics can get, and how we can heal and recover and transcend those relationship struggles. So today is a topic that I've been really geeking out on for many months or years or so to speak. And it's basically how our autonomic nervous system affects all things that we do, all relationships, all ways that we speak and engage and interact with people. And as you can imagine, when we experience trauma, that also kind of rewires and affects that autonomic nervous system. So it's really important to know that you can kind of do all this kind of surfacey communication skills and how it all went wrong and all that kind of stuff. But until you really start really understanding deep down inside the way that your wiring is responding to these people, to these cues, to these situations, and really bringing it explicitly into the conversation, you probably will feel like it's just coming at you, happening to you, and you're kind of a victim of it, versus being able to finally realize that, okay, I might be able to assert some level of control with this autonomic nervous system. I got here by constantly asking why, because as we know, we always go, why are we drawn to that person when we know that they're so toxic or unhealthy? Why, after that person's betrayed me and they've apologized and I know they're not doing it anymore, why do I feel so unsafe around them, or so much anger? Why is it pretty much a known fact in the clinical world that people who've experienced severe trauma as a child continue to be exposed to trauma year after year after year, often into their adulthood? Why are the patterns the way that they are? And a lot of the answers came from my research from Brene Brown's Shame and Vulnerability, of kind of understanding how that's a very unconscious drive in us. I've done lots of videos on those. You can go back and look at Brene Brown. I kind of break down what shame is, what vulnerability is, why we struggle with it. But really deep under that, the shame, so the thoughts of like, oh my gosh, I'm not enough, and what if they really knew me, and why doesn't this person love me? Why am I not enough for them? Why couldn't I have stopped them from doing that? And the vulnerability of exposing myself to the risk of these people and these relationships and life and not knowing what's going to happen. That all is basically triggered by your neurobiology, by your nervous system. So hang in there, y'all. I'm going to give you kind of a neurobiological 101, but I really feel like this is the linchpin. I feel like when you start understanding this stuff and being able to talk about how it shows up in your body, in your life, in your relationships, it can be a significant game changer. And I finally found kind of a theory, a methodology, and Tammy will post it for you, and we'll also post it in the comment section of the videos, so you can kind of print it out for yourself, fill it out for yourself. Maybe if you're in therapy right now, bring it into your therapist. But this is really, I feel like, a way to bring in the discussion about how this trauma, these crises, these relationship issues are making your body go haywire. So this is based on basically, the theory is called the Polyvagal Theory. It's very, I'm not a big fan of the name, but it's just basically saying it's respecting the multifacets of the vagal system, that is our autonomic nervous system. Now, the most important thing to remember is that autonomic nervous system means that it is unconscious, automatic, involuntary. So we don't get to sign up for it. We don't get to schedule it. We don't get to, at first, we don't get to alter it. We find out there's plasticity in it, that we can change it and alter it later on. But if you're not paying the utmost attention to it, it all happens as a default setting in you. So where does it come from? It's basically, you've heard me say this a ton of times before. We are wired when we come out at birth. So much of our wiring is made to connect with other people. We are not meant to be an isolated species. We don't survive in that state, and there's tons of evidence of that. There's a tiny, very tiny, tiny, tiny amount of the population that is not wired to connect with other people. But we are all wired to feel really, really good and have lots of feel-good emotions when we're in connection with people, talks, touching, sex, babies, all that kind of stuff. And then really bad, yucky, uncomfortable feelings when we're in an argument, someone dies, someone leaves us, we failed at something, we fell short, etc. So our wiring is saying, you got to go out there. You can't stay in this cave. You have to go be with other people in that big, bad, scary world. And oh man, we are all feeling right now how big and bad this scary world is. So I can only imagine what everyone's nervous system is at this time of life. But our wiring is meant to mitigate all risk. So the moment we open our eyes, the moment our ears turn on, in fact, even when you're in a state of sleep, you're constantly assessing risk around you. You're constantly, without realizing, because again, it's automatic, involuntary, takes very little blood flow, very little oxygen. It is scanning your environment, looking at everybody's body language, hearing voices, hearing sounds. I mean, how many times when you're sitting in a restaurant having a conversation with someone and you hear those dishes shatter in the kitchen, it's very seldom that you'll just keep having the conversation. It's like everyone has to hold up for a minute, just kind of reference, okay, we all pretty much know what that sound was, but let's find out where it is. And then once you see it, then you move on back to this step. If it was a louder sound and a sound you couldn't identify and was confusing for you, you bet you'd be looking around to figure out and scan and say, what is that sound? My brain and long-term memory can't identify what that is, and I don't like that. You know, without you even realizing this is all happening, we are constantly receiving cues of what is safe, assessing threats. So imagine every time you're with your partner, every time you go into therapy, every time you're in your office, your body flares up and explores who's safe, who's not, what's my level of threat by just the slightest thing, an eyebrow raise, someone not saying hi to you when you say hi back to them. And then from there, you tend to write that shame voice, etc. But let's see. And so what Stephen Porges, who kind of created the Polyvagal Theory, and then Deb Dana, who's a licensed clinical social worker, she kind of broke it down into more layman's clinical terms so we could talk about it like humans, not like scientists. He calls this concept neuroception. And I really love it because it's this idea, we think we have thoughts. And yes, we do have thoughts. Those are our perceptions of life. We see things and we go, oh, she doesn't like us. But what we don't realize is that she raised an eyebrow that gave us a social cue that something's off. And that's our neuroception. Our nervous system, from her facial expressions or her tone of voice, told us that she's not safe or something's going on there. And our prefrontal cortex hasn't fully been able to kind of explore and vet and decide, is that right? Is that wrong? But we write a really quick story that moves from our neuroception of our nervous system picking up like a cue of danger or threat and shifts it quickly over to a perception of, oh, that must be the case then. So I really want you to understand that. And I would love for you to start incorporating that into your language as you're moving down this path, trying to get through these crises and these relationship issues. What's my neuroception? What's my neurobiology telling me is happening? And what is my perception? What are the thoughts that I've created? What are the shame voices that I've, come up with? All related to my nervous system initially giving me those cues. I think that can be a really big game changer, kind of bringing this in, because eventually, and I hope you know through all my webinars, is the goal is to eventually bring it up to that prefrontal cortex where, this is the most complex part of our species. The brain was built from the top down. So like our caveman brains down here, this is that dorsal kind of freeze. And then there's the sympathetic state above here, and that's kind of that fight or flight. But then the most complex part is the neocortex, the prefrontal cortex. That's what kind of set us apart from other mammalian species and other species, which is the part that we can go like, oh no, she wasn't raising her eyebrow at me, or no, her tone of voice, maybe she's just having a rough day. You know, I can reference much more complex theories, such as, oh, I do know she's having a hard time with other friends or her husband, and so maybe she's just in a really bad mood because things haven't been going her way. It sounds insane, but other species can't bring it through that complex of a sorting system. Once that prefrontal cortex goes online, we can do amazing things about figuring out what is actually a threat and what is a perceived threat, and what is old kind of caveman wiring that my brain is hung on to tell me, hey, this is very dangerous, pay attention because this might equal your death or destruction, or it's just a variation of it, but it's not the same thing, which is very, very applicable for betrayal trauma, let's say, right? Because you have a partner who's hurt you and done these horrible things and lied to you, and you store that in your long-term memory of like, ooh, danger, bad person, stay away. And then you start sleeping you sleep next to them at night, and you're going to therapy and you're repairing the relationship if that's what ends up happening. Or even let's say you start a new relationship eventually with another person, but back there in that back of your brain, you have it stored up that this equals bad, this equals too much vulnerability, don't do this, danger, 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 danger. And you really have to bring it up to your conscious level to really start sorting through all that stuff. So our neuroception often makes meaning before our perception makes sense of what's actually going on. And again, we look at today after this webinar, just pay attention to everybody's voices. Like if you go into a coffee place, scan the room and actually look at what your neurobiology is assessing. You know, there's dogs, you're probably checking dogs to make sure they're friendly. If you're paying attention to people's body movements to make sure they're congruent, they're not too jerky or too strange or too I don't know, just out of normal, right? We have a very specific range of what's okay and comfortable and acceptable. And just pay attention to people's facial expressions. Pay attention to your facial expressions, what it feels like in your face when you're engaging with people. And this is based on conditioning, history. It's different for everyone. So remember that your cues that equal safety and security is not someone else's cues for safety and security. The perfect example of that is any kind of trauma history, right? If I suffered any kind of like abuse, let's say, I may not feel safety and security from someone hugging me because I've had my boundaries violated where people haven't respected me. So let's say if I'm getting in an argument with my husband, I have clients actually where she came from a domestic violence and she would constantly domestic violence home growing up, and in couples therapy she would keep talking about he raises his voice at me and the kids, he gets upset, and he was just like, I wish I had a video because my raising the voice is like, get over here kids, get out of the shower, it's time to get out. But she comes from such a traumatized, loud voices equal dad coming in and doing really scary things to me and my mom, that just even that slight increase of a voice, even though it's just he's just trying to yell louder than the sound of the shower, is something that gets her nervous system up into hijacked gear. So really pay attention to that. What are things that actually help you feel safe? And know that it's not what another person feels safe if you're in that kind of co-regulation couple system. Okay, so this is, if you could bring up in the window the PowerPoint. But this is, there's going to be two. One's kind of the general one that I'm going to ask you to download, and then one's going to be one that I filled out. Yeah, and I'll send them to Scott, so he definitely, when he posts them to sectionrelationshiphealing.com, he can put them down there. And then I will also, when I post to my YouTube channel, I'll put them down as well, because I'd love for you to print these out and fill this out, because as you can see, it provides you an opportunity. I did this as a group with my addicts in treatment, and it went off much better than I thought. So yeah, so stay on the first one first. Yeah, that one. Okay, so there's 3 sections. The ventral vagal is kind of the top part, if you can imagine, where you feel connected, safe. So right now, I'm present. I see Tammy. It feels really weird that I know there's, you know, several attendees here and I can't see your faces. So there is a little level of sympathetic going on, because I'm not able to read my audience, scan your faces, make sure that you're not like raising your eyebrows at me or falling asleep, right? So I feel a little uncomfortable not being able to see everybody, but for the most part, I'm present. And the ventral vagal state, that's the state where you are social, engaged, and connected. And then the next phase of, it's not kind of full threat-con, you know, 20, but it's what I like to call kind of the agitated phase. It's the sympathetic, it's your mobilized phase. That's the phase that will trigger a flight or fight phase. So it'll kind of be not full on, the world is ending, everything's crashing down, but the phase where you're like, okay, something's irritating me, something's not right, something's not fixing. So it'd be like the crash of the dishes, and you're looking at your person that you're having dinner with, and the noise is behind you. It's that irritating, like, turn around, make sure that really was what you thought it was. Just turn around, just really fast, just confirm it with your eyes. That's that sympathetic. It's an irritant that's saying do something about it. It's a mobilized state, and it's flight or fight. The next state is the bottom. It's the dorsal state. Now this is really, really interesting, but Stephen Porges kind of talks about how we, our ancestral, kind of like the way our species has evolved, like one of the species that's closest to us that's a reptile is a turtle. And so he always uses the turtle in a tortoise shell to kind of give you that metaphor for what the dorsal state is. They have, as you've seen, a tortoise, like a completely shut down dorsal vagal state, that when they're uncomfortable in a fearful state, what do? Withdraw, pull into their safe shell, tuck in, and don't come out again until they know. And that is what the dorsal vagal state is. And immobilized, you are immobilized with fear. You experience a freeze or a collapsed state where it's just like you've scanned the situation. There is nothing that you can do to fix it. So just curl into that fetal position, just stop moving. And I will remind you too that when we're in a ventral state and everything's copacetic, and we are operating in a normal way, these other nervous system states help with lots of automatic, involuntary parts of our body, right? So think of all the things that happen in our body without us having to think. You know, our heart beating, we don't have to think about that, it beats. Our digestive system, same thing, breathing. Our sexual responses, sometimes it does, we are one of the species that require cues of safety often before we can have sexual responses, but often that is involuntary. Any kind of waste expulsion. And you often hear those stories about people when they get in those extreme states of trauma, fear. You might remember when you've been in those moments of extreme states of fear, and people will throw up. Sometimes in extreme cases, they'll pee or poo their pants. Their heart rates for sure start going on haywire. Their breathing is not able to stay. So those are all, when you're in a normal, healthy state, that is operating the way it's supposed to be operating. When signs that your nervous system is haywire is often that you are having issues in these categories of your life. Another autonomic, automatic system that occurs is your immunity system, right? So we've talked about that a lot. that people who are experiencing these high levels of crisis issues, betrayal trauma, they will get sick. Because again, all these things that are supposed to happen automatically, involuntary, kind of run like a well-oiled machine, are not able to do that when they're busy otherwise using the other purpose of their system, which is to keep you in fight or flight, or keep you in that freeze collapse state, or you are in that freeze collapse state. So do wonder that, and do explore that when I'm, if I'm having serious digestion issues, heart palpitations, issues with my sexual response, issues with waste expulsion, getting sick all the time. Obviously go see your doctor, but sometimes and oftentimes it's correlated to the fact that your nervous system has to spend so much time with you being on high alert, ready for the threat, that it can't spend the time and energy and oxygen and blood that it needs to go focus on those bodily functions as well. So I hope that sheds light on some of you for that. So can you switch over to, well, let me just show you that. Yeah, that's fine. Let me move this so I can actually see what you're doing. Okay, so this is an exercise you can do on your own to kind of figure out how these states show up in your body. So like I said, like it lists in that corner, think of events where you were in each of these states. Obviously, if you're in a therapy setting or you're alone, don't think of the really deep, dark things. Just try to think of, like I said, that dishes sound, a recent not so bad argument that you might have had with your partner, but think of events where you've been in that state. So a ventral vagal state, and then the red writing that you see is, I just tried to kind of fill these out in my words. The exercise is that, name them for yourself. You name these states. Like, what are these states? What do they mean to you? The other question, can you click up to the first one? Back in that corner, I forgot to mention, answer the following for each of the states. The world is fill in the blank. I am fill in the blank. Because what Deb Dana really wants you to do, and this is like the polyvagal mapping that she talks about, is she wants you to understand how your story, your perception, is strongly correlated with your neuroception. And sometimes changing the story, the perception, can help shift your neuroception. So they're very tightly intertwined, and you need to understand and respect what's going on both. So switch back to the next one. So I kind of gave an example. So I thought of events where I was in each of these states. I was thinking about how does my body feel in these various states, and what would I call these states? So for me, the ventral vagal state is when I feel like I'm congruent. I'm behaving the way I mean to behave. I'm being present with my children. I'm not yelling at them because I'm stressed out. I'm able to think things through and not be completely like, wow, just what happened to that hour of my life? I'm aware, I'm present, I'm engaged. The sympathetic is, the words that came up for me is, it's this irritation, annoyed, flustered, like things aren't going well for me. So let's use an example. My Tuesdays and Thursdays are pretty crazy because I go to my treatment center in Malibu and I go pick up my 3 children at their 3 different schools. And then I head back, and it's like in a millisecond, I'm unraveled. So I'm driving through the Malibu Canyon, and I'm kind of able to be ventral vagal. I'm listening to podcasts, or I'm looking at the beautiful nature, and I'm congruent and engaged. If I had to be honest, I have a probably glimmer of sympathetic, because I'll also be processing my groups, what clients have said and done. So there'll be a little bit of agitation, how did you do? How did that go with that person? Gee, I wonder if they like me. I wonder if I can fix this. I went, all that kind of random stuff. But that's my go. Sympathetic is my over-functioning go phase. Then I pick my kids up, maybe the first one, I realize I'm going to be 5 minutes late. And so I start feeling, oh no, she's going to be upset at me. And so that heightens my sympathetic nervous system, gets me a level of flustered. The world is, my sentence for that would be, the world is demanding. Like the world, because my value system, so much of what I think makes me valuable, right? So this is correlated with my shame voices, is about performance. So you are as valuable as you are in performance. So my stories are correlated with performing and showing up. So when I'm in a state of sympathetic, agitated, irritated state, the story I'm telling myself is the world's just asking a lot of me, like everybody is. And I am in the process of failing. So that's why you see in quotes failing. Like I'm currently not executing things the way I'm supposed to be executing them. That's triggering my perception, you know, thoughts of shame and stuff like that. But it's that I am failing. And the way I respond in the sympathetic state is different than dorsal, because that makes me overperform then. So maybe I'll speed up to make sure I don't, you know, I'm not 5 minutes late. Maybe I'll start trying to answer people's text messages while I'm driving. Yeah, super dangerous. No, I'm just kidding. I'll do it hands-free. Or phone calls, or I'll text to give my daughter a heads up that I'm running late. And then I'll go pick up all the children. And depending on how crazy the drive home is, I may end up arriving to the house in a dorsal state. So no, it doesn't mean I pull over the car and I pull into like the fetal position on the side of the road. But I'm no longer able to think about what needs to get done. I kind of just like kick them out of the car and just have them go about their way. I don't engage with them. I'm not exactly in production phase. I'm in brain shutdown phase. I'll probably escape to my phone and just be in a still state there where I'm completely unproductive and time passes. The story that I might be telling myself in that stage is that the world, like I just can't do it. There's just too many demands on me. This is the rat race that never ends, and I'm not going to win. So the I am, you know, in sympathetic state, I was in the process of failing, but in the dorsal phase, it's just, that's it, I'm a failure. So then you go into under functioning, right? So anyone feel like they've been in that, you know, where it's like they go from I'm present, I'm engaged. So you can click back to me again. Is this is a really great exercise to be figuring out how the nervous system shows up in your life, you know, how it shows up in your relationships. Are you a runner? Are you a get out, don't talk when someone raises their voice, you shut down? That's great to know that you are someone who spends most time in your dorsal state, and we need to figure out the cues of safety for you, because they're different for everyone, that will kind of allow you to get out of your turtle shell. If you're that higher functioner where you run on that treadmill and that's where you spend the majority of your life, where you're not present, you're just performing and you're functioning and over functioning and getting really irritated and really flustered, you know, that's important to know too, because it's important for your family to know that that's the type of person that you are. Your goal is not to always be in ventral vagal. You know, it sounds wonderful to be like in a congruent, present, like namaste, present state all the time. But don't forget, like we constantly have cues of unsafety that we need to pay attention. So we don't, you know, we want our sympathetic nervous system, we want our dorsal, but we also want those two stages to know that once the threat is removed, we need to start changing the neuroception and the perception of what's really, really going on, instead of that long-term, like danger, danger, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? You know, it's there to keep us safe, but not to cause us to go into an insane asylum, basically. So what is the answer to this? Is we are put on this earth and given neurobiological wiring to act as co-regulators as well. So my face expression can be a cue of safety, you know, especially let's say as clinicians, so much of our work has to be being that container, being that safe, predictable, non-threatening person for someone who's coming in dysregulated. Because, you know, it's really incredible. More studies they do, it's like, let's say they hooked that client up and they had all these marital issues and they came into the room and started sharing it, and they were very moving around in high voice and screaming and upset about what's going on. If you hooked up a heart rate monitor and took my stress hormones, they'd be nearly matching theirs, because we are co-regulating animals. And you have to be very, very careful and take very conscious steps to down regulate yourself. So part of the responsibility is knowing where you're at, calling it out, and then saying, okay, how much of this is stuff that I can down regulate? I can just remind myself I'm safe, or where I need to put myself in a safe spot. There's various things that help. There's exploring, what am I feeling? Why do I feel this way? What did you say to me? Or how did that make me feel? Help me understand why you're responding this way. You seem to be very upset about this, and I don't understand why. Something Deb Dana said that I love is she's like, she says, curiosity keeps you in ventral vagal. When you are asking these questions, you are seeking clarity that gets you out of your sympathetic and your dorsal states and brings you up to that prefrontal cortex. So stay curious. Why am I feeling this? Where am I feeling it? Why are you feeling this? Why are you, what did you hear? What's the story that you're telling yourself? Let me think what else. And just remember that co-regulation occurs with face expressions, with voice intonation, face to face, face to face. Like right now, I don't see any of you. I can't co-regulate you. Maybe if I stopped and I did some deep breathing myself, your mirror neurons would pick up on my deep breathing and would trigger you to start breathing deeper and slowing your heart rate down. That's a possibility. But it's not as effective as two people being face to face in a co-regulation state. Safety is when you know what to expect. Trauma is when you get blindsided, and just removing that threat doesn't heal the trauma. You require safety, social cues, social engagement to kind of bring you back to that prefrontal cortex, executive functioning, ventral vagal state again. And so really start paying attention. I mean, I could list a ton of things: scanning the room, deep breathing exercises, movement, sighing. She says like, ah, is like a, whatever your version of sighing is like a nervous system resetting system. Sharing your story with another person where they are listening and engaged and showing reciprocity. All of these things can help bring you back to a ventral vagal state. And so that is it for today.
Videos of animals. Right? I mean, really, it helps.
That is why those YouTube videos are so viral, is because it's like, it's a great kind of numbing, like, because actually it's really interesting. Stillness mixes ventral vagal with dorsal. So there's these couple combinations that your brain uses. So like play mixes a little bit of ventral vagal, because like I'm connected to you, but with a little bit of agitation. So let's say you and I were like playing tennis. So there's a little bit of agitation where we're competing with each other, but we're in a state of play. And it's like, those are good combinations. And then stillness of just like watching those cats play together, those puppies like eat each other's ears, just like puts you in this dorsal kind of immobilized state, but it's like ventral, like this is great. And that's okay.
When you were talking about, the wife that, that any kind of raising of the voice, like I thought, wow, how difficult, to try to regulate and to every single time, something gets elevated, to have to process through and go, it's not dangerous. This is not the same. And how, so almost kind of like, how do you intervene on that? If you automatically go to the dorsal vagal state, how do you start recognizing that it isn't a threat? I mean, do you have any ideas on that?
Right. So Deb Dana's saying the fact that you have that history of that wiring, you'll be sent there, but it's, sent to like the dorsal shutdown, however she responds. Actually, she just shut down, or she walks away. That's how she got through her childhood. Is now, we talk about it so often that we bring it into the discussion, that she's able to tell him, when you yell at the kids to get out of the shower so loudly, all I see and hear are my dad. Those were her words, my dad, and that equals bad things. So I think so he knows he's a co-regulator for her. and the kids. And so he can kind of bring that into his conscious level of trying to manage that a little bit better. And she can also speak to her neuroception of like, thank you, neurobiology, for keeping me alive. But this man's not threatening my children. He's just trying to yell at them to get out of the shower, and the shower's loud. So, so that's really, it's just bringing it in explicitly can do powerful things.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We are already in a heightened state with this whole coronavirus and this fear and the threat. We have the election going, so many things that already have us, what I feel like is in a sympathetic state constantly. So it's like you already start there. It's not going to take much more to kind of ramp up that nervous system or give you more digestion problems or give you heart rate issues, right? Because your sympathetic nervous system is already not able to focus on what it's supposed to be doing because it's already at this constant heightened status. She's saying that's what a healthy functioning nervous system is supposed to be, that you can go on that run and kind of be in both sympathetic and ventral, and that's okay. Like you're not going to be able to stay in ventral like we all wish we could be in that little utopian society where nothing irked us. That's just never going to happen. So it's more, you can't get stuck in any of these places. And that's where the real suffering comes from, is when we have that neurobiological pattern or wiring that keeps us stuck in that sympathetic state, keeps us stuck in that dorsal state, and it's miserable. I know that lots of research shows that, oxytocin is considered the hugging cuddle drug, and that sometimes that can, that pressure against your chest can release oxytocin and make you feel connected and safe again. But like I said, people who've experienced physical trauma and boundary pushing, that might not be safe and healing to them. So really, it's some people doing dance and slow movement is this freeing, calming experience, or watching puppy videos. So that your cues for safety and your cues for calm and connection are your cues. You can read more to get some ideas, but you have to practice them and see what works and what doesn't.
My granddaughter got a weighted blanket, and
oh yeah,
I was like, I want one. But my daughter was like, because she has a hard time settling, and so they got her the weighted blanket, and she will go self-soothe by, like, she just knows she needs a timeout, and she goes and puts on the weighted blanket. And I was like, but I was like, oh my gosh, that has to feel, for her. And like you just said, there are people that have experienced physical abuse that may not be a fit for.
Yeah, or being held down, right? That
right. But for someone like me, I'd be like,
right.
Like in the summer, I live in Arizona, and if we have the air conditioning on, and I'm putting on the heavy blanket because it feels good,
Right. So while I'd love to give a long list of like, these are the things that you should do to get back to your ventral vagal state, sometimes me saying deep breathe, like breathe deeply, will be like, for some people, I'm like, hell no, I'm not breathing deeply. Close your eyes. Oh, I am not closing my, right? Like, so one person's cues for safety are not another person's cues. So I can't sit here and list. I can give you examples, but that's about it.
So they add, I think after decades of toxic abuse, I belong now in the 1% you mentioned. I was not like this before. I became like this after so many toxic people.
The 1% are people who are born unable. So sociopathology, like people who are literally born, and that's, I think, often a misnomer, and that's not my expertise. But there are a lot of people who look as if they cannot feel any emote, but that is often they're finding now because they're constantly in that dorsal state. That it's not that they have the wiring to get to that ventral connected state or that sympathetic state, that they do feel remorse or hurt or shame, but they are often wired to always be in that turtle in the shell, shut down, I can't feel, I'm out, see you later, I'll reject you before you reject me, I don't need anybody, I'm an island, all this stuff that is not accurate. There's a tiny percentage of people who are born without the wiring. And actually, even when I read interviews about them, because I find like antisocial or sociopaths kind of interesting, that they'll even say, I have the wiring for it, it's just extremely muted. So
Mm.
your experience, like everyone's experience of love or exhilaration, is like a tiny like glimmer for me.
You know, I can see how, we've talked about this before too, with betrayed partners, you know, their systems are shut down, their autoimmune, lots of
Right.
chronic, chronic medical
Right.
conditions, you know, as a result of this. And it all makes sense, you know, particularly in light of what you've shared as well. But, you know, for this person that is sharing, you know, yes, after decades, as indicated,
Right.
of
Right.
toxic, you know, that, you know, but you know, like, I always think that there's hope. You know, I do really believe that our bodies and minds are amazing things, and if we just get the right support and, you know, and help, that you know, there will be scars, and, you know, like, you know,
Right.
we'll always carry something, but overall, you know, we can mostly, you know, go through it. Even like you're talking about with, you know, the partner where the loud voices, you know, there can be things that both of them can do to make that
Yeah.
shift.
And we're working, Tammy and I had talked about bringing on someone who does trauma treatment. So kind of the big sexy names right now are neurofeedback, like brain painting, brain spotting. It's a kind of a subset of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So brain spotting, I have a friend who's like certified in everything, so she kind of translates it for me. But it's really fascinating now that they can do such in-depth, detailed brain scanning and research on these topics. They are actually seeing the way that it's helping rewire these brains for people like you who suffered so much trauma, to literally rewire your brain into some way where you have the capacity to feel again, to feel safe, to not spend so much time in dorsal state, not constantly feel like you're in a sympathetic state, and to experience social engagement, social connection in that ventral vagal state. You know, there's a lots of hope there.
So the next question, any suggestion on how to help the partner who is suffering a consistent shutdown state, chronic illness, gastrointestinal issues, etc.?
Thank you for asking. That's really a great question. So, remember, you do have a superpower. It is co-regulation, and you can either use that power for good or for evil, to be honest. You know, you can be a source, because remember, safety is, this is expected. So you have to do lots of things that, hence the reason that maybe if you don't return a phone call when you were supposed to, you didn't come home right when you were supposed to, you'll come home to a partner who's very dysregulated because you're not doing what's expected, and it's got them thrown into like a sympathetic or a dorsal state. So stay as consistent as possible. I have a 3-year-old right now, so I'm learning a lot of their tantrums are based on they don't know what's happening, and I haven't made things clear enough for them. So I don't want to minimize or like offend your partner, but it's kind of like that. You know, they have a very dysregulated state that they can't even verbalize. So saying, hey, I'm going to go, this is where I'm going to be, this is who I'm going to see, I'll be back at this time. That actually can help down regulate their system because it's giving them containment of knowing what's going on. I'm going to this, you know, a lot of my betrayed partners, when I ask them how it's going with their partner, the first thing they start saying is, well, we're talking every day. They're going to meetings, they're going to therapy sessions. You know, they're very into like showing that they're doing these behaviors that means a lot to them. For shutdown mode, you have to ask them what helps them feel safe enough to make them want to come out. So if they've metaphorically pulled into their shell, you know, that remember, you get the curiosity going. If you get the curiosity going and the questions asked, that can bring them up to that prefrontal cortex state. So help me understand, did something happen today that made you want to shut down? Did I do something? What's going on with you? You know, may I hug you? What's something, do you need some time away? Do you need some quiet time? Or can maybe we just sit next to each other and not talk? Do you need to talk? And you just kind of trigger that curiosity in a calm, face to face, as often as you can do face to face exchanges is ideal, because our body is scanning people's face expressions for sincerity and honesty. They're paying attention to like head tilts, like how the intonation of their voice. We're reading all these things for authenticity, and that's very important, especially for betrayed partners. As far as the chronic illness and gastrointestinal, I would encourage, aside from obviously going to see doctors, I would encourage them to go get trauma treatment, right? Because that's basically saying that they are probably in a very sympathetic dorsal state, where those other involuntary kind of default bodily functions aren't able to function at full, full capacity. And so sometimes the EMDRs, the brain spotting, the brain painting, the neurofeedback, the yoga, the movement, the singing, the breath work, the meditation, the groups, the supportive groups where they can be connected can help with all of that. And the one thing that gets in the way of healthy, kind of safe, consistent co-regulation is when your shame gets in the way, right? So you see a person in a state of hurt and pain, and all your nervous system's on haywire because the shame voice you're telling yourself is, I did this to her, or I did this to him. I'm not like that anymore. How can I show this person I'm not like this anymore? Why is he or she still upset about this? Why can't we move on to this? Because I don't do this anymore, I swear. And so that dysregulation within yourself is going to, when you're in that sympathetic state, you're not going to be able to be a co-regulated ventral vagal presence for that partner. So sort that stuff out before you go in there. This is her or his issue. I can be present for her or his issue, and find out what I need to do to support it.
So I think if no one else has any other questions, we're basically at the end of our time. So as always, Kristin, great information. And this will be available on the recorded and on Kristin's YouTube channel. So check that out. And we'll see you next month.
Yes, and I wanted to take an opportunity to shout out to my YouTube channel viewers, subscribers, to just say thank you for the support. Thank you for the comments. I read everything. So please keep them coming in, and I'm flattered to hear that these have all been so helpful to you. And thank you to sexandrelationshiphealing.com for creating this platform so we can get this information out to everybody. I'm so happy that this has been a source of help and support and healing for so many people.
Likewise, I'm very grateful for that too. So that's why we keep doing it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.